Hello friends! Welcome back to another episode of Reddit Nuclear Revenge. This episode has 5 stories: how a businessman got stripped because he was too cheap and rude to a waitress, and how one person single-handedly ruined a man's restaurant and any hope for future success. I hope you stay for these 2 stories today and subscribe for future videos. Story 1. New York City bar too expensive for Midwest man. In the early 2000s, I worked in an Irish pub on 2nd Avenue and 9th Street in Manhattan. We were used to seeing Midwestern men on business trips announce that they would get the bill saying, "This one's on me," only to regret it when they saw the bill and realized that drinks in Manhattan don't cost the same as at their local dive bar. Enter Ohio businessman, a waitress, and me. So this group of guys came in and started ordering beers. One guy, Ohio businessman, announced loudly, "Order whatever you want, this tab is on me." So they racked up a tab of around $400 in just over 3 hours. When the bill was brought to Ohio businessman, he started yelling about being overcharged. He said, "There's no way, this is our bill, we didn't drink this much." I approached the table to try to help. I asked what seems to be the problem. He replied, "This waitress is trying to overcharge us. She's trying to charge us for extra drinks." I said, "What's the problem with the bill?" He responded, "Well, first of all, there are 6 shots on the bill. We never had any shots." I said to him, "Sir, there are 6 empty shot glasses on the table." He replied, "Okay, maybe we had the shots, but there's no way we drank this many beers." I continued, "Sir, there are 6 of you. You've been here for over 3 hours. At that rate, this bill says you and your friends have averaged 1 beer per 45 minutes. Does that sound outrageous to you?" His friends then chimed in and said not to worry about it, and that they'd pay, to which he said, "No, I'll pay." So, he paid and tipped $7.37 because this would make his expense report total up to the closest $10. After this, the waitress came up to me to tell me he left his wallet in the booth. She was shaking. She told me that she wanted to chuck it in the trash. I told her to hand it to me, and I'd take care of it. I took the driver's license out of the wallet, put it on top, and rubber banded the lot. Keep in mind, government-issued ID gets free postage. I walked a block up the street to drop this in a USPS box. Ohio businessman came back, asking about his wallet. I told him what I did. He went off on me, saying, "What am I going to do for money? My hotel key was in there." He even threatened to call the police, to which I responded, "For what? Going out of my way to make sure your belongings made it back to you?" He kept going on about how he had no money, no hotel key, and no cards for the rest of his visit, but the only card he really needed was his driver's license for ID. I know he left before it ever occurred to him to ask how the heck he would get on that flight back home without it. Welcome to New York City! Story 2. I destroyed my family friend's business and credibility. A few years after I started university, a friend of my mother's, who we'll call Cook, started what can be generously called a restaurant in a small town a couple of hours outside the city we lived in. It was really a glorified hot dog stand at a golf course. My mother had invested money into this business, so she had a personal stake in ensuring its success. That meant she would often enlist us, aka my brother and me, to wait tables when she couldn't do it herself. My brother hated this guy. Cook had no idea how to run a business, and he was completely uninterested in learning. He was also completely computer illiterate and had me set up the Google account for his business. To get us to work in his business, he would pick one of us up from our home, drive us 2 hours or so out of town, and we were basically stuck there until we were driven back. Neither of us had a driver's license, and since my brother had problems with this guy, I was the one who, more often than not, had to spend 2 to 10 days at a time there, stuck in a barely livable house until I was let back home. My mother was no better. She would often volunteer us to work 2 days in the middle of the week, making job hunting very difficult for my brother and me. Furthermore, she treated us not like employees but as her children. Any mistake was clearly our fault. Not because neither of them could train staff, use a computer, manage a business, or utilize my brother and me in the most effective way, considering my brother had already graduated university and was working toward a double major in business. Furthermore, they were completely unprofessional. They would host shouting matches in Chinese where customers could hear, and the kitchen was filthy. Despite Cook's insistence that the kitchen was the cleanest place in the restaurant, yeah, right, an ice rink was less slippery than the ground in there. He would routinely touch cooked food after handling raw meat, and I distinctly remember sweeping up what I thought was a green bell pepper, only to realize it was a moldy onion ring. They couldn't train staff at all. They had hired 5 people in the first year and none of them came back the next year. Cook, in particular, was especially two-faced in how he handled customers. He would smile at them, greet them, and remember details from previous conversations, then turn to me and say in Chinese how they're all stupid, stingy retirees with too much money and free time on their hands. All of this left a great feeling of resentment for both my brother and me. Not only was it effectively trapping us to work for this completely incompetent individual, but we would basically get nothing out of it. This was particularly frustrating for me because, as a business student at the time, I could see all the ways this place could improve. I even offered to write up some policies, do some inventory management, and take a look at the administrative side just to help out and get some experience for myself. They kept insisting that they didn't need it. Sure, we were paid the bare minimum and the guy did know how to cook, but we had to bear the brunt of their frustration while hiding the fact that we were sick of helping out, until we couldn't anymore. The incident happened last year. I graduated university, but it was not as happy a time as it should have been because my grandpa passed away the week before. I couldn't even celebrate the night before I walked the stage because I had to give part of the eulogy the previous day, and I had to mediate an incident between my brother, mother, and Cook because my mother couldn't join pre-graduation shots for me. I was stuck on the phone for 3 hours listening to how insensitive Cook was over the fact that my grandpa had just passed away. But I figured that once I walked the stage and had my diploma, I could spend the next week job hunting. No dice. Immediately after I graduated, on the Monday afterward, my mother voluntold me that I had to work 10 days in that hellhole. I lasted 6 days before it happened. There was a breakfast brunch for Father's Day that barely anyone attended, and most people who did show up wanted to order off the menu. But both Cook and my mother were incredibly stressed out, and both were taking it out on me. My mother spent the day micromanaging me and finding flaws in every little thing I did, like cleaning an empty table over clearing, plates from a table out on the deck, or not immediately refilling coffee or water when a glass or mug was half full. Cook just shouted a lot and gave contradictory orders every 2 minutes. But it was the combination of my mother and Cook screaming at me for a mistake I didn't even make, refusing to listen to me, and Cook mocking me for breaking down in tears that made me realize that not only could I not handle it anymore, but I wanted to burn the place to the ground. I booked a flight out of the province that day and left a week later. The revenge. Remember that I said they were not only completely unprofessional but also completely computer illiterate? Despite the fact that I was no longer in the province, I still had the login information for the business. Furthermore, because I knew all the laws that he had blatantly refused to learn, I knew all the violations he'd committed in the business. For the first part of my revenge, I signed out of his computer from the Google account. I don't think it was really necessary since he never used that computer in the first place for anything other than porn, but I wanted to make sure he and my mother wouldn't be able to stop me. Before I left the province, I claimed the business on review sites using the email and business phone number, then blasted every single review, positive or negative, with all the crap he used to say about customers. Any negative review was immediately marked. Any positive review was left with a note like, "Thank you, you cheap jerk." Any questions were met with hostility, basically boiling down to, "I'm right, you're wrong." I also mentioned how he didn't wash his hands in the kitchen and the yelling in Chinese or insults about uppity customers. Given that it was a tourist-based town, I'm fairly certain that the deep dip in sales that my brother mentioned later on was because of all those reviews. No one suspected a thing because my mother and Cook didn't know how to work the internet, and my brother didn't care enough to look up the business. Next, I meticulously documented all the complaints that I had, between my brother and myself, as well as those from a few people that Cook had hired but never kept because he couldn't train them. I reported the 2 times that I slipped in his kitchen, incidents where he refused to wash his hands between handling salad and raw meat because it took too long, and I handed those off to the Health Services Department. I also anonymously informed the tax revenue agency that he was severely underreporting income, as employees were instructed to only write down the credit and debit receipts to report in sales. The third part of my revenge wasn't really my doing, to be honest. Rather, it was because of his own incompetence. As I said before, he was completely computer illiterate. I didn't even have to lock out the person he hired to do accounting because he didn't bother reporting his business expenses except by handing them a garbage bag full of receipts. To be honest, I kind of felt sorry for them because their hands were tied. They couldn't dispute any of the claims that I made. What I did do, however, was text them all the things that my mother and Cook said about them so they wouldn't bother to try to defend him. They quit a month after that mess hit the fan. In the end, Cook was left holding the bag. Naturally, given that the business wasn't making nearly enough money to make rent, let alone pay off all the fines he was slapped with, the government repossessed everything. From everything in that little dinky house he was renting for business purposes to every single fork and knife he bought. Because of all the health code violations, he couldn't find a job as a cook again, which was his only job for about 30 years. And because the tax revenue agency knew how bad he was with managing businesses, they naturally denied him when he requested a permit to open a new growing operation. As far as I know, he's no longer in contact with my family, but his brother-in-law, who's my mom's hairstylist, mentioned that he had to move somewhere else to get away from all the bad reputation. My mother mostly got off scot-free because all the business permits and licenses were under his name, but she lost quite a bit of money. Last I heard, my family had to move into a smaller house, and no one knew that I was the one who did it. My brother suspected as he relayed the details of what happened to me, but I never confirmed it. Not that I would tell my parents, because honestly, screw that hellhole. As for me, I'd like to say that everything is sunshine and roses, but my decision to impulsively move provinces had its ups and downs. I did manage to find a place to live and a place to work, so at least I'm alive. It's hard, but I'd rather be doing this than going back. Story 3. In good and bad times, my grandmother is fairly wealthy, thanks to family money and a few good investments. She built up her inheritance to what it is now, due to never having to work and enjoying the finer things in life. She had quite the circle of friends who are quite wealthy and successful themselves. It's like a cliché from a movie. This story involves one of her friends, whom I'll call Maria, and her husband, who will be named Joseph. Maria and Joseph were long-time married. They started with a small furniture business. Maria was the salesperson, and Joseph was responsible for buying new collections. While they ran the business, Maria had to stay in the country and keep an eye on the shop and the kids, while Joseph ventured through Europe in search of new, cheap but nice furniture to flip for huge profit. It all started fine. The kids were growing up, and the shop got quite successful, eventually becoming one of the biggest ones in the country. However, dark clouds started to form in the marriage. Joseph wasn't only looking to score furniture, he also scored loads of women in other countries, leaving Maria alone for weeks while he slept with numerous people. This was the pre-digital era, so there were no mobile phones yet, only the promise to send a letter once in a while. During their life together, Joseph would cheat on Maria every time he saw the chance. After a while, he didn't even care if Maria knew. He would even bring his mistresses to the home city to spoil them in fancy restaurants. When Maria decided that it was enough, he made her life hell, basically turning on her with the flip of a switch. She couldn't leave him because of the kids, because of her lifestyle, and because of the business, and he knew it. So she endured everything. Anytime she decided to fight back, painful consequences happened. He was the man. He was even forcing her to sleep with him on many occasions. Later in their life, they became elders, gave up the shop to their kids, and retired, deciding to take it easy. Maria had long lost her interest in Joseph, but still wouldn't leave him because she could see a slow decline in his health. Joseph got sick, really sick, with a combination of Parkinson's and cancer, and he eventually ended up in a wheelchair. Maria, like every good wife, decided to nurse him until she couldn't do it anymore. In my country, you have something like euthanasia. If you still have a good mind and you're in a lot of pain, you can go to the doctors and the notary and draft a paper that, whenever you can't care for yourself anymore, you can choose to end your own life. In Joseph's circumstance, it's important to say that Maria had to keep the official letters and make the final say because Joseph wasn't in the right mindset anymore. Thus, her revenge began. Joseph got worse, and as time passed, his cancer started to infest his body. He was a shade of his former self. He was in pain all day and morphine barely helped. He begged and begged for Maria to hand over the euthanasia papers, and she simply smiled and said, "No, which papers?" For weeks to come, he begged Maria to pull the plug, to end his suffering. For the weeks that Maria was at his side, she simply replied, "No, maybe tomorrow," slowly watching her husband fade away, hearing his pain and his begging. She would always answer that this was what he deserved for all the years of making her miserable. To the outside world, Maria was a caring wife, and Joseph was simply too far gone to make sense if he rattled about the papers to someone else. 4 to 5 weeks in the hospital, and Joseph passed, a not-so-nice death. It was painful, gruesome, and exactly on the terms that Maria decided on how he should leave the world. I found this tale quite disturbing, how Maria got revenge on the husband, giving him hope that each new day might be his last day and his. Pain would end, but crushing it every day again as well, to let him suffer in a cancer-infested body, only to die on her terms. Story 4. Vengeance and Justice with One Hand. This happened to my dad's great-uncle. I'll just call him Uncle because Nuclear Revenge doesn't want acronyms. I never knew him. He died in 1998 when I was about 5, and my dad didn't know him very well either. He was kind of reclusive. Uncle was a Holocaust survivor, but he never really talked about it. He never gave a testimony, never collected reparations, and never went back to his homeland, which was Ukraine. He also never sought out if his friends or family survived. He just moved to the US, met up with a family he had there, and started over. He got married, had kids, all the while never saying much other than, "I was there." The only reason we know any details about this is because one night, one of his sons got him drunk, and he spilled the whole terrible story. Later, the son found out that the mother knew a fair amount, so she understood to an extent. But after that, he refused to say anything more. The son has been spending the past few years trying to figure out more from the records. We don't know what concentration camp he was at, but one day, in his late 20s, not more than a day after he got off the train, an officer at the camp pulled him aside from the working line and began berating him about being lazy. The officer then said he needed to be made an example of so the others wouldn't slack off. So, he took out a cutlass, and off came Uncle's hand. The officer told him to get back to work and walked away laughing, leaving Uncle to bleed out in the snow. The others tried to nurse him and keep him as healthy as they could, but his wound got infected, and he got terribly sick. Luckily, the others picked up his work and helped him as much as they could. Apparently, Uncle said that he had made peace with the fact that he was going to die in there and be fed to the dogs. The officer continued to torment Uncle. He looked for any excuse to beat and demean him. The officer took away his food, his shoes, had dogs attack him, made him do complicated jobs that required 2 hands, and so on. When the camp was liberated, Uncle went up to a soldier and asked if they had captured any officers. The soldier said they did, and Uncle asked if they caught the officer who had tormented him, which he said while he showed the soldier his stump wrapped in soiled bandages. The soldier brought the officer to him, handcuffed, and ordered the officer to his knees while 2 other guys held him. Uncle then, with all the soldiers around him watching, proceeded to choke the life out of the officer with his remaining hand until the body was lifeless. Evidently, it took quite a while, and apparently, one of the soldiers even offered Uncle their rifle, but he refused, as he found joy in sucking the life out of the man who took his hand and tormented him and countless others. Afterward, Uncle got a wooden hand, moved to America, got married, and had kids. All the while, whenever someone saw his tattoo or asked him about the war or the camps, he just showed them his wooden hand and said, "I was there. I don't want to go back." I can't imagine the kind of PTSD he must have had from that experience. I can't imagine the pain and trauma it caused him. I doubt he ever got any real help either. It seems like he just took it all to the grave. But things like that shouldn't be forgotten, no matter how painful as they should be remembered, so we as people never allow something like that to happen again. I hope he was at least at peace with himself and at least enjoyed the life he made after that ordeal. Story 5. You break my glasses. Have fun with your remaining ear for context. I was tall for a 5th grader, but I was a friendly giant type. I wasn't violent, though I had anger issues, and they usually came out as a verbal berating of whoever had attracted my wrath. I was the kid who made teachers go to the counselors in tears, but that made me an easy target for bullying. Kids always wanted a reaction without the threat of violence. As for the incident, it was during gym class. We were wrestling, and it was my turn. Since I was in a weight class of my own, I won almost every time, and some of my bullies didn't like that. So 2 of them wrenched my arms out from under me while I was in a match, and a third decided to slam onto my face, breaking a $200 pair of glasses. I probably should have taken them off, at least that's what the bullies' parents said when they refused to pay for them. My mom decided to punish me by taking my personal savings away to buy new glasses. This was completely ridiculous. They assaulted me, and I was being punished for it. That was 3 years of savings down the drain. So I went up to the kid the day after and told him to meet me behind the school to settle this. He and his 2 cohorts came, and I told them what happened. I said it was 3 versus 1. If I won, they would pay me back. If they won, I'd never chew them out for the crap they pull in the future. So we went at it. I rammed the main kid into the wall and head-butted him, breaking his nose. They all swarmed me. It ended when the leader tried to bear hug me to the ground, and in my adrenaline-fueled rage I bit him. More specifically, I bit his ear, actually ripping most of it off. Everyone froze at his scream of pain. We ran to the nurse, temporarily calling a truce as you do in that situation, and we got an earful about the fighting, no pun intended. The mother wanted to press charges, but the bully admitted to instigating the incident, so it was a case of self-defense, and we all got suspended. The bullying never stopped, but when it got too much, I would begin to walk forward, and no matter who it was, they'd run for the hills. My nickname for the next 2 years until I moved was Feral. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Nuclear Revenge. Leave a comment to let me know if you think these stories deserve the Nuclear Revenge badge or not. If you aren't subscribed, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. And if you missed the last episode of Nuclear Revenge, it's right here. See you guys in the next one!